When we talk about progress in society, we often, rightly, speak of the strides made in gender equality, especially for women and girls. Girls are outpacing boys in school, they're earning more college degrees, closing wage gaps and entering leadership roles in unprecedented numbers. This is a triumph, a testament to decades of hard work, advocacy, and investment. But while we celebrate these gains, we have neglected something critical. Boys are falling behind, and they are falling fast. Look at the data, and it's impossible to miss. Boys are now significantly less likely than girls to graduate from high school. In the United States, for every 100 girls who graduate with a bachelor's degree, only 74 boys do. Boys are 3 times more likely to be suspended from school and far more likely to be diagnosed with behavioral disorders. In adulthood, young men are more likely to be unemployed, to live with their parents, and to struggle with substance abuse or suicide. And yet, when we talk about inequality, about education reform, about opportunity, we seldom mention them. There's not just a blind spot, is a problem, because if a significant portion of our population, roughly half, is facing systemic challenges and we choose not to engage, we're not just neglecting those individuals, we're weakening the very fabric of our society. Every boy who fails to thrive is a future man who may struggle to find purpose, to contribute meaningfully, to become a partner, a father, a citizen. The ripple effects are generational. Part of the reason this issue gets overlooked is that, frankly, it makes people uncomfortable. We're used to thinking of gender disparities in terms of female disadvantage, and in many contexts that still holds true. But we need to be able to hold 2 thoughts in our heads at the same time. We can celebrate the success of girls and women and recognize the urgent challenges facing boys and men. These are not competing causes, they are connected. There's a false sense that acknowledging male disadvantage somehow undermines the progress of women, or that it's a step backward into some regressive worldview. But what we're talking about here is not a return to an outdated model of masculinity. It's an honest look at how our systems are serving or failing all of our children. And right now, they are failing too many of our boys. What's especially worrying is how early these disparities begin. Boys start falling behind in school as early as kindergarten. They develop language skills later than girls, are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, and are more often punished for behavioral issues. By the time they reach middle school, many boys already see themselves as not academic, a dangerous identity that can follow them for life, and it doesn't stop in the classroom. Mental health is another crisis point. Teenage boys are far more likely than girls to die by suicide, a horrifying reality that points to deeper issues of disconnection, despair, and emotional isolation. Too often, boys are socialized to suppress their feelings, to man up, to push through pain silently. This cultural script is costing lives. We need to stop treating boys' struggles as either personal failings or as politically inconvenient. They are neither. They are systemic. And systems can change if we choose to change them. That means recognizing where our schools are failing boys and adapting. It means allowing for different developmental timelines, especially in early education. Research has shown that boys' brains often develop more slowly in areas related to impulse control and verbal skills. We must stop punishing boys for being boys and start creating environments where they can flourish. It also means asking serious questions about how we raise boys, not just as students, but as emotional beings. We need to give them permission to be vulnerable, to seek help, to express themselves. This isn't about softening them, it's about strengthening them in ways that matter. Importantly, this is not a story about privilege versus oppression. Yes, some men hold disproportionate power, but that doesn't mean all boys have access to opportunity. In fact, when you disaggregate the data by race, income, geography, you find that it's often the most disadvantaged boys who are suffering the most. The boy in a working class neighborhood with no father at home, who's barely hanging on at school, he doesn't feel powerful, he feels forgotten, and too often he is. We must do better, not just for the sake of these boys, but for the future we all share. A society that allows half its youth to fall behind is not a just society, is not a healthy society. And in the long run, it's not a sustainable one. Let's be clear, this is not a call for sympathy. It's a call for action, because If we don't take seriously the challenges facing our boys today, we will be dealing with the consequences for decades to come. The question is not whether we can afford to focus on boys, it's whether we can afford not to. And when we talk about boys and young men today, one of the most overlooked aspects is how unclear the path is from adolescence to adulthood. In generations past, the journey from boyhood to manhood was marked by specific rites of passage, some formal, some informal, but always present in some shape or form, whether through family traditions, cultural rituals, early entrance into the workforce, or even through military service. Boys had a sense, however imperfect, of when they were no longer just boys. That moment, however symbolic, carried meaning. It told them, now you are expected to contribute, to take responsibility, to become something more than what you were. Today, that path has become murky. We have largely dismantled the old signposts of manhood, but we haven't built anything to replace them. We've extended adolescence socially, educationally, economically, without giving it a clear destination. And what we've ended up with is a generation of boys who aren't sure when or even if they become men. They're not sure what it means to be a man. And perhaps most troubling of all, they're not sure if being a man is something worth aspiring to at all. Now, that's not their fault. It's ours. It's a failure of culture, of institutions, of adult leadership. We have, with the best of intentions, told boys that they can be anything, but we've neglected to tell them what they should be. We've always told them to be kind and respectful and thoughtful, important values, no doubt, but we haven't provided the structure to help them build an identity that feels strong, dignified, and earned. This lack of structure has consequences. When boys lack a sense of direction, they drift. That drift can look like apathy, it can look like rebellion, it can look like chronic gaming, school dropout, or retreat into online subcultures that offer some warped sense of purpose or belonging. In the absence of healthy structures, unhealthy ones rush in to fill the void. That's not because boys are inherently troubled, it's because they are hungry for meaning. They want to know how to become men. They want to expect it of them, and they want those expectations to feel fair, achievable, and anchored in something real. That's where we've gone wrong. We haven't adapted to the world boys are growing up in. The labor market has changed, education has changed, family life has changed. But our cultural conversation around manhood has remained stuck between nostalgia and neglect. We romanticize the past, or we ignore the issue altogether, hoping it'll sort itself out. It won't. We need to reimagine the transition from boyhood to manhood in a way that reflects the realities of the 21st century. That means creating new rites of passage, modern, meaningful, and inclusive. It doesn't mean returning to rigid gender roles or archaic norms. It means designing experiences and institutions that help boys build character, competence, and a sense of responsibility. It means helping them see adulthood not as a burden, but as an achievement. Schools can play a part in this. So can sports teams, faith groups, community centers, even workplaces. We need mentorship programs that don't just tutor boys in math or reading, but walk alongside them through the complicated emotional terrain of growing up. We need educational systems that recognize different kinds of talent, not just academic brilliance, but practical intelligence, leadership potential, emotional strength. We need narratives that celebrate men not for dominating others, but for serving others, for being protectors, providers, mentors, builders. And yes, we need families to step up, particularly fathers. The presence of a positive male role model, whether it's a dad, uncle, coach, or teacher, can make a profound difference in a boy's life. It's not about enforcing some narrow script of masculinity. It's about modeling integrity, resilience, responsibility, showing boys what it looks like to stand up, to follow through, to own your actions, and still show empathy. But this work doesn't fall only to men, it's all of us. Society as a whole must value the transition from boy to man. We must stop treating it as automatic or worse, irrelevant. Because when we fail to support boys in becoming good men, we don't get less masculinity, we get broken masculinity. We get confusion, resentment, sometimes even rage. And ultimately, we all pay the price for lost potential, broken families, and communities that fracture instead of flourish. If we want stronger men, we have to build stronger bridges to manhood. That's not nostalgia, that's progress. If we're serious about helping boys become men, we have to talk about fatherhood. And not in the abstract, not just as a sociological category, but as a lived, vital experience. Because here's what we know: being a present, engaged father is one of the most transformative roles a man can step into. It's not just a benefit for children, though it is. Profoundly, it's also an identity-shaping role for men themselves. Fatherhood gives purpose, structure, and meaning. And in a world where many young men are drifting without clear direction, that kind of role has never been more important. But here's the problem: society doesn't reflect that value back to men. We have a cultural narrative that tends to see fathers as secondary, sometimes even as a punchline: the bumbling dad in sitcoms, the weekend visitor in broken homes, the figure in the background rather than a foundational presence. That's not just inaccurate, it's damaging. It sends the message to young men that being a father isn't something to aspire to, or that if they're not perfect, they don't belong in that role at all. That's a loss we simply can't afford, not for the boys growing up today and not for the generations to come. When you look at the research, the importance of father involvement is beyond dispute. Children do better on virtually every measure when their dads are actively involved in their lives, academically, emotionally, behaviorally. This isn't about replicating old patriarchal models. It's about building new ones rooted in presence and partnership. And yet, when families break down, which they often do, our systems tend to push fathers out rather than pull them in. Whether it's family court, child custody arrangements, or even cultural expectations, we've built too many barriers that separate fathers from their kids. What we need is a structural shift, a realignment of both policy and culture that reflects what we now know, that fatherhood matters and that men need support in that role. That starts with paternity leave. We talk a lot about maternity leave, and rightly so. But the lack of substantial normalized paternity leave sends a signal to men right from the start that their presence in the early days of a child's life is optional. It's not. Fathers who take leave early are far more likely to remain involved long term, but too many men don't feel they can take that time, either because they can't afford to or because they fear it will damage their career. That's not a personal failure, that's a policy failure. We also need to reform family law so that it's not stuck in outdated assumptions. The default presumption in custody cases should be shared parenting, because children deserve both parents. And fathers deserve a fair shot at continuing to play an active, meaningful role in their children's lives, even after relationships end. Too often, men are seen as financial contributors, not emotional ones, as if a check in the mail is a substitute for being there at bedtime or on the soccer field or at the school play. That mentality belongs in the past. Culturally, we have to do more to affirm the value of fatherhood as an essential element of modern masculinity. That means telling better stories about real dads in all their complexity. It means challenging the idea that men are somehow less nurturing, less emotionally capable, or less important in the lives of their children. It means holding up fatherhood not as a burden or a backup plan, but as a noble calling in its own right. And we need to do all of this, especially in communities where father absence is already prevalent, not by shaming men, but by building ladders back into connection and involvement. That includes job support, legal aid, mentorship, and community-based programs that help fathers succeed in their roles. If we want boys to grow up with a strong sense of what it means to be a man, the most powerful example we can give them is a good father. Not a perfect one, a good one, a present one, a striving one, because ultimately, fatherhood isn't just about raising children, it's about raising men. When a boy sees his father showing up, loving consistently, failing and trying again, he learns what responsibility looks like. He learns that strength isn't about dominance, it's about dedication. He learns that masculinity can be tender and reliable and deeply human. We are in a moment right now where the future of manhood is up for grabs. And if we don't want to lose another generation of boys to aimlessness, isolation, or resentment, then we have to start by honoring the role that turns boys into men: fatherhood. That's where the work begins. Not every boy is wired to thrive in a traditional 4-year college setting. And that's not a failure, that's reality. But the way our current system is structured, we sent a very clear message. If you don't go to college, you're somehow less than, less ambitious, less smart, less successful. And that message is not only inaccurate, it's dangerous. Because for a growing number of boys and young men, the path through higher education isn't just difficult, it's inaccessible, unsustainable, or irrelevant to the lives they want to build. And yet, it remains the gold standard. This one-size-fits-all model is failing too many of our young men. We need to broaden our definition of success. We need to open up more doors, not fewer. And that means taking vocational education seriously, not as a fallback, not as a second choice, but as a first-class pathway into adulthood. It's no coincidence that boys are disproportionately represented among those dropping out of college or never enrolling at all. But what happens after that? Often nothing. There's a void, and that void is filled with uncertainty, with underemployment, sometimes with despair. The transition from school to work used to be clearer. There were systems in place, tracks to follow, mentors to guide you, but those have withered. We've dismantled vocational programs, defunded apprenticeships, and devalued skilled trades, all in the name of pushing more kids through college. That's a mistake, because there is deep dignity in work that doesn't require a college degree. Electricians, plumbers, welders, mechanics, these are the people who keep the world running. These are good jobs, meaningful jobs, jobs that build communities and families. And yet, we've wrapped so much social status around academic degrees that we've made young men feel ashamed for pursuing a different path. That shame is costing us economically, socially, and personally. When we talk about evolving as a society, we have to include how we prepare boys to participate in that society. We can't keep measuring their worth by how well they sit still in a classroom for 16 years. We need to invest in alternative routes to success, and that means revitalizing vocational education, not as a relic of the past, but as a solution for the future. And let's be clear, vocational education doesn't mean low standards. In fact, done right, it demands rigor. It means hands-on training, real-world problem-solving, discipline, and mastery. It's not about tracking kids away from success. It's about expanding their access to it. There's a big difference between being excluded from the college track and being offered an equally valuable alternative. We also have to confront the cultural narratives that equate masculinity with disengagement or aimlessness. Many boys want to build, to fix, to move, to do, and we've boxed them into environments that reward verbal fluency and emotional compliance above all else. That doesn't make them broken. It means they need a different environment in which to thrive, a place where their energy is not a problem to be medicated, but a strength to be cultivated. That's what good vocational training can offer. It gives boys tangible goals, it makes learning relevant, it reconnects effort with outcome, and it teaches responsibility not in the abstract, but through real stakes. You're not just turning in a paper, you're building something that works, that matters, that someone is going to use. But we can't just leave this to chance. Reviving vocational education means serious public investment. It means partnerships between schools, employers, unions, and communities. It means updating the curriculum, modernizing facilities, and matching training with the jobs of the future, not just the past. It means telling a different story, starting early, about what it means to be a successful man. We also need to change the way we talk to young boys about ambition. Not every dream has to start in a university lecture hall. It can be in becoming a master craftsman. There is ambition in opening your own HVAC business. There is ambition in being the best welder in your town. And yet too often, boys who express interest in these paths are treated as if they're settling. They're not. They're choosing a future that fits. If we want our sons to grow into strong, contributing men, we need to meet them where they are, not where we think they should be. We need to give them tools, not just metaphoric tools, but real ones. We need to stop seeing vocational education as the consolation prize and start seeing it for what it truly is, a gateway to adulthood, to independence, to pride in one's work. Because when a boy learns how to build something with his hands, fix something that's broken, or take responsibility for a real outcome, he's not just learning a trade, he's learning who he is. And in that moment, he begins to become a man. That is the evolution our society needs. One of the most powerful, yet underrated tools we have in supporting boys as they transition into manhood is mentorship. It might sound simple, even old-fashioned, But the presence of a steady, positive male role model in a young man's life can change everything. We're not just talking about having someone to play sports with or help with homework, though those things matter. In relationship grounded in trust, consistency, and a shared understanding of what it means to grow up as a man in today's world. Far too many boys are growing up without that kind of guidance. In the US, for example, about 1 in 3 boys lives apart from their biological father. That absence isn't just physical, it's emotional, relational, and social. And even among boys who do live with their dads, many still don't have the kind of active engagement that helps them make sense of life's most formative years. Schools can provide structure, peers offer camaraderie, but it's often mentors, men who take a genuine interest in a boy's development, who bridge the gap between adolescence and adulthood in a way no institution can replicate. And here's the thing, mentorship doesn't require perfection. It doesn't take a flawless man to be a great mentor. What it takes is presence, listening, sharing stories, offering perspective, letting a boy know that his questions about life, identity, failure, ambition, those questions matter, that he matters, and that someone is walking alongside him as he figures it out. Research supports this. Boys who have mentors are significantly more likely to finish school, stay out of trouble, and feel a stronger sense of purpose. They're more likely to develop emotional intelligence and resilience. They're better equipped to navigate challenges, whether that's family instability, economic hardship, or simply the messy business of growing up. In fact, when mentorship is intentional and consistent, it can act as a kind of emotional scaffolding, supporting young men while they build their internal structure piece by piece. What we're seeing, though, is that too many boys don't have access to this kind of mentorship. Programs like Big Brothers Big Sisters have done phenomenal work, but they're often overstretched. The demand far outpaces the supply. And that's where society has to step in, not just through formal programs, but through a cultural shift in how we view adult responsibility toward the next generation. There's a deep need for men, especially those who've navigated life's ups and downs, to step into this role. Do understand that mentoring is not an add-on or a luxury, it's a necessity. It's a form of social capital passed down not through inheritance, but through intentional relationship. And it doesn't require changing your entire life. Sometimes it starts with a conversation, a regular check-in, a coffee once a week. It starts with showing up. It's also worth pointing out that mentorship is not a one-way street. Older men often report that mentoring gives them a renewed sense of purpose and vitality. It reminds them of who they once were, what they've learned, and what they still have to offer. In a time when male loneliness is rising and social bonds are fraying, this kind of intergenerational connection benefits everyone involved. It helps create a culture where being a man means being invested in others, not just in your own success, but in the success of those coming up behind you. If we truly want to help boys become men, we have to show them what manhood looks like, not in abstract slogans or social media stereotypes, but in real human form. They need to see men who are responsible, kind, resilient, and fallible, men who failed and gotten back up, men who struggled and kept going. That's what mentorship offers. It's not about presenting an ideal. It's about offering a relationship that says, you're not alone. I've been where you are. Let's walk together for a while. We talk a lot about systemic solutions, and we should. Policy matters, institutions matter, but human beings matter too. And for boys standing at the edge of manhood, what often makes the difference isn't a grand intervention. It's someone showing up consistently, believing in them when they can't yet believe in themselves, and offering the kind of grounded presence that says, you're seen, you're capable, and you're not in this alone. That's how boys become men. People often ask me why I focus so much on boys and men. Isn't this the time to center women and girls? Haven't they historically been the ones left behind? And of course, they have a point. Historically, women have fought long and hard for rights and recognition, and many battles are still being fought today. But what I find troubling is the implication that caring about boys somehow diminishes the progress of girls, that helping young men find their footing in the world is in direct opposition to the goals of gender equality. It's not. That's a false choice. It's not either slash or, it's both slash and. We've internalized this idea that if we turn our attention toward boys, we're somehow betraying the cause of feminism. But feminism at its best is not about one gender triumphing over the other. It's about human flourishing. It's about fairness, dignity, and opportunity for everyone, regardless of gender. And if that's true, then it must include the well-being of boys too. Now, when I talk about the struggles boys are facing, whether it's in school, in the labor market, or in their personal lives, I often see two reactions. One group nods and says, yes, finally someone's saying it. The other group gets uneasy, as if acknowledging these challenges somehow threatens the hard-won progress of women. But let me be absolutely clear. Talking about the problems boys face is not an act of opposition to girls. It's an act of inclusion. Inclusion means seeing everyone. The truth is, boys are navigating a world that has changed rapidly. Many of the old expectations about masculinity have been rightly challenged, but in the process, we've created a vacuum. We've told boys what not to be. Don't be toxic, don't be aggressive, don't dominate. But we haven't given them a compelling alternative vision of what it means to be a good man in today's world. We've deconstructed the old model without building something in its place. That leaves boys confused, unsure, and often disengaged. And when boys disengage from school, from work, from relationships, the consequences don't stay neatly contained. They ripple outward. A young man who feels like he has no purpose is more likely to retreat, more likely to struggle with mental health, more likely to become a version of himself that neither he nor society can be proud of. Helping that young man find his way back isn't just good for him, it's good for everyone around him. This is why supporting boys and men should be seen as an act of compassion, not competition. We need to break out of this zero-sum mindset that assumes more attention for one group means less for another. If a school introduces a reading program specifically aimed at helping boys catch up, especially when we know boys are trailing girls in literacy in almost every developed country, that's not anti-girl, that's pro-child.